I hope by now you've had a chance to listen to the introduction to explain what we're going to be doing over the next 8 sessions. And if you haven't, I'd encourage you just to pause and go back and do that. The question we were asking is there a part of your life that you wish was different? Maybe it's something that's happened to you, or something that you've done in the past, or just something that's going on in your life that you wish you could change. Is that you? Do you feel stuck? Then Reset is a series to help you. And we're going to begin by looking at the first of the Beatitudes, Matthew 5 verse 3. And that says to us, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." I don't know whether you've ever sort of unpacked some of these to go a little bit deeper, but the emphasis of this Beatitude is it's all about recognising our true self, our real position, that sense of are we willing to empty ourselves of our false self-beliefs, our faulty coping mechanisms, the masks that we wear. I don't know about you, but I've gone through my life where I've not wanted people to really know some of the things that are going on in my life, and I've lived with a mask on where I've tried to hide things. And this Beatitude says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit." Those people who sort of reach the end of themselves and say, enough is enough. This Beatitude speaks of humbling ourselves, and it challenges us to begin to admit to ourselves the parts of our character that we know aren't right. When we do some recovery work, we often talk about this first step of being about realising that I'm not God. And that might seem a really strange thing to say when we're a part of a church that worships God. But sometimes we live in a way that sort of thinks we are God. We think we can do anything we like and it won't hurt us. We can do what we want and there'll be no impacts. It's as if we live unaccountably. And this is where this Beatitude challenges us to get honest. And when we look at our cycle of change, we're really beginning at what we call the pre-contemplation stage. This is the stage where we begin to ask ourselves the question, do I really want to change? Many of the people that I work with would say, actually, I don't want to do anything. And many of us find ourselves stuck in a place where we don't want to do anything. And as a result, we stay there. We can quite happily stay there until something comes along and challenges us to step out of that stage and to stop sort of just being happy with the status quo. To start to get honest and say, there's something in my life that isn't how it should be and I wish it could be different. And I wonder whether you're ready to begin this journey of getting honest with God and saying, God, what is it that's in my life that I need to get rid of in order that I can know how to live life to the full? The place where we need to start is to ask ourselves, what is it that stops us from beginning this journey of change? What is it that keeps us stuck in that place of not wanting to change? And I want to introduce us to a word which is going to come up throughout our series, and that word is denial. When we look at our life, what is denial? We might say actually, we live as people who are enlightened, and we have lots of sort of things out there. We can go onto the internet, onto YouTube, we can get all the self-help videos we want. I'm not in denial, I feel pretty good. But the reality is there's probably parts of our life where we don't actually want to face or admit the issue that we're trying to work our way through. And the barriers that sort of come up to us to moving forward, maybe it's our past experiences where there's things in our life that have been done to us, or that we've done, or habits that we've formed, mistakes that we've made, where our past experience has left us burned. I don't know whether you can identify with that, but maybe there's something where you did it and you got your fingers burned and you said to yourself, I'm never doing that again. what happens when we are forming our character is that we experience the world around us and we make decisions about how we're going to interact with the world. We create, in effect, a set of rules for ourselves. And those sets of rules, they become a sort of suit of armour, and we form those often when we're children. So an example of that might be that when we're a small child, we know that if we cry and we make a fuss, then we'll get attention. And the problem is that when we start to carry some of those rules into adult life, what worked in a small setting doesn't work in a big setting. And that suit of armour that was designed to keep us safe actually becomes restrictive. It's restricting our growth and stopping us from being able to move forward. We think we're safe, but actually what it's doing is it's locking us into the pain of the experiences that we've had. And what also happens with that is it begins to form repeating patterns of behaviour. So if someone's fear, for example, their experience is that as a child they were criticised for getting something wrong, they might say, I have to be perfect in order for people to accept me. So one of two things happens. Somebody either overdoes it, and actually everything has to be so perfect that if it isn't, then you end up with almost like a machine gun effect of being attacked and everyone around the room's bleeding and the person's going, I've got that off my chest now. Or the alternative is that the person retreats. We retreat because, well, if I can't be perfect, I might as well not bother. And so the false beliefs that we formed, these rules that we created in a small world that worked in a small world, they stop working in a big world and they begin to form repeating patterns of behaviour because they've become so much part of our life. But another barrier to us breaking out of this place of denial, is actually the fear of change. The thought of moving away from those experiences and making the changes that we need to make might seem so overwhelming. It might feel impossible to do. It might feel that it's beyond your capacity to even think about it. We might also become very comfortable with that habit. It's become so much part of our life, but we don't know what our identity would be like if we didn't do such and such a thing. People have come to expect that of us, so if I don't do that, what will people think of me? And we have a real uncertainty about what life would be like without it. We don't know what we would face, we don't know how we would cope. And what we don't realise is that staying stuck actually often means that our emotions are frozen. And rather than being protected, what's happened is there's actually part of our emotions that have shut down. I daren't let somebody close to me, and I'm going to have this behaviour in order to protect myself. And our emotions actually become frozen. I know very clearly in my own life there was a point where I was dealing with something that was so difficult. I physically imagined putting my heart in a box and shutting the lid because I was so fed up with getting hurt and so scared of getting hurt that I literally pictured locking my heart away and saying the only way to keep myself safe is not to feel anything and not to have the emotions. And that was a wrong coping mechanism, and over the years I've had to learn to take my heart out of the box again. But all of those barriers, they have this name, denial. What is happening in effect is that we're putting a mask on so that we don't have to face the situation, we don't have to face the behaviour, we don't have to face the feeling, we don't have to face the situation. And we want to protect ourselves by not going there. There's a great verse in Jeremiah 6 and verse 14, and the Living Bible phrases it this way: you can't heal a wound by saying it's not there. If we want to take this journey of healing, then it begins by being willing to face up to the issues. Let's just unpack this idea of denial a little bit further. What is denial? Well, it's been defined as a false set of beliefs not based on reality. And I don't know whether that's something that you can begin to identify with. If you look at the issue that you put down on your piece of paper before you began to undertake this journey, what is it that you actually believe is true because of that thing that you wrote down? For me, I went through a large part of my life where the comfort that I got actually came through eating. And I enjoy my food. Food is good. Food is something that you need to live. But the reality is that I was replacing feelings that I wasn't getting elsewhere by eating, by comfort eating. And I often joke, my name's Chris and I'm in recovery from overeating. I'm addicted to Pringles because once you pop, you can't stop. Maybe that's something that you can identify with, that there's a sort of reason why you're doing what you do. We all create these rules to live, and as I said before, they're often formed in childhood, and we carry those through into adulthood and find that in a large world they don't work. An example that I like to give is 3 children growing up with a violent alcoholic father. And Dad comes home from the pub and he's really angry and aggressive, and it usually ends up with him beating his wife. And the oldest child is big enough to stand up to Dad and say, "You lay one finger on me and I'll have you." So he has this sort of fight response. The middle son isn't big enough to stand up to Dad, but isn't small enough to be able to hide. So he goes through the appeasement. He says, "Dad, let me go and get the slippers for you. Let me get your pipe for you. Sit down there, Dad." In other words, if I look after you and do everything that I can for you, you won't hit me. The third son is just so small that he can't cope with anything. So when he hears Dad coming home and he hears the key in the lock, he runs upstairs and jumps in the wardrobe and closes the door and hides. All 3 of the children have found coping mechanisms. And then when they go into the adult world, they're suddenly in a place where they're working for a company, and they get a phone call to go into the boss's office. And they all think that the company's struggling, so they're going to lose their job. So the eldest son goes in there, and before the boss can say anything, he says, "Don't you dare, I quit before you do anything." And he gets really angry and ends up quitting a job. The middle son, he'll go in and he'll say, "I tell you what, boss, I'll work extra hours, unpaid, I'll do unpaid overtime, I'll come in and work on my days off. But in other words, if I do whatever it is to please you, don't fire me." Whereas the youngest son just can't cope, so he fires off an email resigning and walks out of the company. What none of them realised was that the boss was so pleased with their work that he actually wanted to give them a pay rise. But because of the coping mechanisms and how they'd interpreted the world around them, they didn't cope with the situation properly, and consequently their false beliefs ended up causing them damage. And typically the belief systems that we formed, we either end up overdoing something or underdoing something. People don't like me, so I've got to be the life and the soul of the party. But actually, by being the life and soul of the party, we're so irritating that everybody pushes us away, and we reinforce that negative belief that we have. And in effect, we're using false rules to reinforce the unhealthy beliefs that we have and lock ourselves into the repeating patterns. We end up living with the elephant in the room. Everybody knows we've got this character trait. We know we've got this character trait, but actually we all just live with it and put up with it. And we make the excuses, that, oh well, there's nothing we can do about it, or that's just the way they are, or they've had a hard life. We end up seeing excuses made where the reality is that those behaviours are actually causing harm to us or to others. And we end up passing responsibility. We live with what you might call if-onlys. If only that hadn't happened. If only I hadn't been in that situation. If only I hadn't made that choice. If only that person hadn't done this. If only, if only, if only. You put your own if-onlys into your situation. If only I hadn't lost my job. If only my marriage hadn't broken down. If only I'd turned left instead of right. There's a film, Sliding Doors, isn't there, which is a bit old now, but it's that sort of summarises the if-onlys really well. Do you recognise any of those character traits? You know, is there something in your life where that's what you're experiencing? If there is, I want to suggest to you that you're living with a sense of denial because you're actually living with something that you're allowing to continue to be in your life that is causing you harm and pain. So, what are the impacts of living with denial? Well, we've touched on some of them already, but let's just do that in a little bit more detail. To begin with, denial, rather than actually protecting us, freezes our emotions. We end up locked into something where often we are so numb to some of the things that are going on in life that our emotions aren't happening, or to put it another way, we sometimes feel the wrong thing. You know, because of the experience that we've had, when something happens, it just reinforces that emotion. I know from my own life, I can look at times where my own life was hurting so much that even today, certain things I have to talk to myself, to tell myself not to be afraid of going into certain situations, because actually people want the best for me rather than want the worst for me. And a typical thing for me would be through my work, where I felt like I was working for many years with people above me who didn't respect me, and I lived with a constant fear of losing my job. Now, that might be a completely wrong fear, but it was a fear that I had. And even today, when my boss or somebody wants to do something, we're going through something at work at the moment called 360-degree reviews, and my first reaction to that, my guts churn, and it's that frozen emotion coming back to the surface where I'm actually feeling something in the wrong way. Another effect of denial is that it actually increases our anxiety. What we end up doing is burning so much emotional energy trying to keep ourselves safe and deal with all of these things and deal with them in the wrong ways, but we burn so much emotional energy trying to keep this mask on so that people don't discover the real me or the issue, or I keep my secret, that we end up increasing the anxiety that we feel because we're so worried that someone's going to find out and discover the truth. The effects of that are that it prevents our personal growth. Rather than keeping us safe, the pain that we feel, that we're trying to avoid, is actually locked in for longer. There's a phrase that we're as sick as our secrets. And I know for some people, I can think of men that I've worked with where there's stuff going on in their life that they know is wrong. You know, when I've worked with men who are struggling with pornography, for example, there's a sense of I'm battling this addiction, but I daren't let my wife know, because if I let my wife know, it's like I'm committing adultery and she won't love me anymore, my marriage will be over. And that sense of rather than, you know, the secret keeping us safe, it's actually preventing us from growing into health and our relationships being healed and our emotions get stuck in for longer. And the effect of that is it ends up damaging our relationships. By not being real, what we're in effect doing is we're escaping into a fantasy world. And that fantasy world can be all sorts of different things. It might be sport, it might be computer games, it might be books, whatever it is, something that can be a legitimate and a genuine source of joy can actually become something that is an escape place where we go to that place. Often for guys struggling with pornography, it's an escape to a reality where maybe the marriage isn't working, so we seek to substitute something for, something for the intimacy of the marriage relationship. We're seeking that in a wrong way. We're seeking to feed that emotional need in a wrong direction. And consequently, we end up living with a false reality and a false expectation. And that damages the relationships that we have because our expectations become unreal. And the consequence of that is, rather than keeping us safe, it separates us in our relationships. And it separates us in relationships with people around us that we love and care for and desperately don't want to hurt. It separates us in our relationship with God because we're living with this guilty secret that we don't want to come clean about. But also it damages ourselves. We actually end up struggling with ourselves. We have almost living with a sort of split personality where I do what I don't want to do. Paul said that in one of his letters, where he said, the things I want to do, I don't do, and we all have that sense within us sometimes. Denial robs us of true inner peace and happiness. It robs us of the opportunity for shalom, for genuine, deep, emotional connection and peace. But the question we then have to ask is, if this is what it does, how do we deal with it? How do we break this cycle of denial? Well, that's something that we're going to be journeying through over the next few sessions. But I want to leave us in this session with two things that I want to encourage us to do. And the first one is this: it's time to stop playing God. We need to start admitting our true self to ourselves and to God. I don't know about you, but the last time I tried to walk on water, I couldn't do it. The reality is, I'm not God. And in the Garden of Eden, the temptation was to eat from the fruit so that we could be like God. And there's something within us that thinks that we are able to completely do whatever we want, and we're bulletproof. Nothing can touch us, and we can get away with whatever we're doing. And the reality is that we find ourselves in a place where we're hurting. We know we're hurting ourselves, or we're hurting other people around us. And quite simply, it's time to fess up, get honest, and say, I need to stop playing God. And the second thing I want to give us is to stop denying the issue. We need to start admitting that there is this elephant in the room, the thing that we never wanted to discuss. There's that place in our life that we don't want to go to. Many years ago, I got a picture in my mind of an old castle, and you walk into this this sort of stately room that's been deserted, and the light's breaking through the windows and illuminating the room. But in the corner of the room, the light isn't quite getting there, and there's cobwebs growing over the corner of the room. And it's that corners of the room where the cobwebs are growing over, where we've allowed part of our life to get to that place. For us to move forward, we have to be willing to shine the light into those cobwebby areas of our life where we've spent years saying, I'm not going there because it's too painful, I've put a lid on it, I don't want to take the lid off of Pandora's box. But we live with that sense of the false belief still impacting us. We live with the impacts and the effects of what's been done to us or by us. And those things are affecting us today. And if we really want to know healing, the invitation we have is to start admitting we need help, and to be willing to look into that area of the room where the cobwebs have grown over. Our key verse is, blessed are the poor in spirit. In other words, blessed are those who start to get honest. Blessed are those who begin to humble themselves, who begin to admit their true self. But when we do that, there's a promise. The second half of this, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. The promise is that when we start to get honest, we will have the kingdom. In other words, we will be part of the family. And that speaks about acceptance, it speaks about security, it speaks about peace. And do you find yourself in a place where you wish you were accepted? Do you wish you were in a place where you felt secure? Do you wish you were in a place where you had true peace? The promise is that if we're poor in spirit, if we're willing to do that humbling, getting honest, then the promise that waits for us is an amazing promise of acceptance, security and peace. Will you get honest with God this week? Will you get honest with God after this session? Will you get honest with yourself? Will you begin to admit parts of your life that you've been denying? Let me encourage you to go back to the issue that you wrote on the piece of paper and ask yourself, is that issue something that I've been denying for years is really impacting? Have I been saying that I can live with it? Have I been saying it's not so bad and it's okay to carry on? Or do you know that it's time that actually you need to deal with it because it's affecting you and you want to be free?